The Browns have been especially good this year at provoking strong emotions out their fan base this season. Um, the whiplash is actually insane from this team, right? There's been moments where we have been as mad as you could be at the Browns, and then some moments where the Browns have provided you legitimate joy in a way that you did not expect them, right? It's not just that the Browns are a 3-win team. It's like they chose to win their 3 wins, one in a close game last minute versus Jacksonville, another win against the Baltimore Ravens after a 5-game win streak, and another game after Pittsburgh in a 5-game win streak. So I don't blame Browns fans for when those things happen, which, I mean, you beat Baltimore after that kind of circumstance or Pittsburgh after that kind of circumstance. That's usually going to mean a momentum swing for the season. I don't know what it means for this year, but the result is that if you're a Browns fan, you have whiplash. We've gone up, back, down, back, left, back, right, back, up, back, down, back, pretty much the whole season. And I could imagine this has gotten pretty exhausting. And the most recent thing I've seen where the expectations and the hyperbole around something has gotten a little bit up there for where we are right now is the conversation around Jameis Winston. So that's what I want to do today. I want to talk about realistic expectations for Jameis Winston, right? Because I think Jameis is one of those people, and this is a growing amount of players that you have to say this on. He's one of those players where the people who love him the most aren't right about him, and the people who don't like him a lot are not right about him, right? You really got to pay attention to the nuance to get what Jameis Winston is and what he isn't, and what you should expect and should not expect from Jameis Winston. So what are the realistic expectations for this Jameis Winston thing? If it works out, does it have a chance to work out? All of that. Let's get into it. So let's start with the first part of that question. Does this Jameis Winston thing have a chance to work out? My first question, if you ask me that question, is what do you mean by workout? Right? If your definition of it working out is that Jameis Winston becomes a top 5 franchise quarterback and goes off into the sunset as a Super Bowl champion with the Cleveland Browns, I don't think that is in the range of realistic possibilities. Could it happen? Maybe, but I wouldn't suggest that it would. If your idea of it working out is Jameis Winston can provide 1 or 2 or 3 years of quarterback play where he has a positive touchdown to interception ratio and he is a good enough quarterback to justify starting or an average to above average starter, I think that is certainly a possibility with Jameis Winston. Who I think Jameis Winston is at this point is a quarterback who's going to throw you about 26 touchdowns, about 13 interceptions. Like, that is what I believe Jameis Winston to be for you in 2024, 2025, and 2026, right? I don't know how well his game ages because his game does rely on him having the arm talent to make some incredible throws, and his arm talent has always been inconsistent to begin with. And another thing about Jameis, I don't think people understand. I think people understand that Jameis Winston does 2 things. He throws interceptions and he makes wild decisions at times. And it's easy to hear those 2 things and think to yourself, oh, Jameis Winston throws interceptions because he makes wild decisions. That's not usually the case. Jameis Winston, like maybe 5% of his interceptions are because he's making a wild choice. But the bulk of Jameis Winston's interceptions do not happen because he's making a crazy choice. His interceptions happen because he is making a choice he does not have the arm talent to be able to complete on a consistent basis. Jameis be trying to fit windows that Maybe Josh Allen could fit. Maybe Pat Mahomes could fit. Maybe Tom Brady could fit. But not a window you would expect Jameis Winston to fit. And the thing about Jameis is there's going to be games where he hits those windows. There's going to be games where he misses those windows and he throws interceptions. Like most of Jameis's interceptions, and I went back and watched 3 years of Jameis in New Orleans, right? I did a video about this earlier this year when we were waiting on Jameis to play. So go back and check that out, right? If you really want an in-depth primer on what Jameis Winston was in New Orleans. And what Jameis is somebody who he sees the field and processes at a level that's above average for NFL quarterbacks. The problem with Jameis is that the arm talent for him is not consistent on the range of elite quarterbacks, right? So sometimes he'll make those throws, sometimes he'll miss those throws. But if you make the right decision and you can't get the ball there in the NFL, that's going to turn into an interception. That is what Jameis is. And once you understand this about Jameis, your expectations and frustrations with him go down. Both of those things, expectations and frustrations. You're going to be much less frustrated at the interceptions because you understand what is going on. And your expectations are going to go down just a little bit because you understand what is going on. Jameis does not make a lot of bad decisions. Now, look, you could cut up a tape of Jameis doing some wacky shit. I ain't gonna tell you that that's not the case. But like if the most of the 95 to 90% of Jameis, like the non-meme stuff with him, it's him making what you could see is like, hey, that's actually a good decision. The ball just didn't follow what his mind wanted it to do. And that's just gonna be what happens with Jameis. And that is why I say it's important that we can enjoy Jameis Winston. We can embrace Jameis Winston. I have no problem with that. I'm a big Jameis Winston guy. But we always have to understand what Jameis Winston is, right? And what his limitations are naturally going to be. And where he's at in his career is he's going to be somebody who's going to be able to throw about 10 more touchdowns than he will throw interceptions. I think he has gotten that in this game, right? He ain't going to go 30 for 30 again, but he's going to throw about 10 more touchdowns and interception. And in Cleveland, that's like really good compared to like the quarterback play that we've had. We think we've had like 2 quarterbacks do that. So we would welcome this. This would be amazing for us, especially given the situation that we're in. But that's what Jameis is. As long as we understand that, we ain't going to get too high with the highs. And we ain't going to get too low with the lows. I saw people talk about Jameis Winston nasty after that Chargers game. Talk about he was just as bad as Deshaun Watson was in 2024. That was crazy. I've also seen people run with Jameis can be, I don't want to pick on the one dude because it really was the one dude that said it. But I've seen people run with some takes about Jameis, right? Where they're like, oh, yeah, well, he was a number 1 overall pick. He could be a franchise guy. You could have found Joe Diamond in the rough. Like, he could be the next Warren Moon or something like that. I've seen plenty of takes where people are willing to take it at next level with Jameis. And if you go there, he's going to disappoint you because Jameis can see it like an elite quarterback. But the consistency to be accurate like one, that ain't Jameis's bag. Right? Some games he's going to be accurate. Some games he's not. If you understand that, you won't get carried away, but you will also be able to appreciate what he brings to the table. So that's what Jameis is, what Jameis isn't. What is the floor with Jameis Winston? You aren't going to be an awful team with Jameis. You're not going to be in the top 2 of draft picks, hopefully, with Jameis Winston in a full season. You're going to win like at least 5, 6, 7 games because Jameis is going to have some bangers where he carries you. And then Jameis is also a smart enough quarterback at this point in his career that if the run game's going, if you have other things around him, he will let those things elevate him, right? And, I could see a situation where if you draft really well, and I mean really, really well, like you hit on some gems, that with a dude like Jameis, you could make a run like the Detroit Lions are going to make a run. Like they're going to at least go to the conference championship. And then the Lions might win the Super Bowl or get to the Super Bowl this year. Do I think a run like that is possible with Jameis? Yes, if everything absolutely goes right and Jameis has the hottest streak of his life, then it's kind of possible. But the issue with the quarterback like Jameis is the playoffs, because in the playoffs, you need consistency. Consistency beats high output guy or high or peak volume guy all the time, right? Tom Brady, Peyton Manning is the most classic story of this. Tom Brady never struggled really to win in the playoffs because he was super consistent. Peyton Manning had multiple struggles in the playoffs because he was not consistent. We're seeing this with Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, where Pat Mahomes is winning championships because Pat Mahomes, at the end of the day, super consistent. Lamar Jackson can be inconsistent at times, right? Consistency in the playoffs is everything. It's very hard to win 4 games in a row versus the best competition in the world without a consistent quarterback. So the question with Jameis, once you're talking about that kind of stuff, is the consistency. That's where you're always going to be limited. Even if he's playing well, let's be real about it. Jameis is always going to be inconsistent. He's never been consistent once in his career. Even at Florida State, he was horribly inconsistent. That's just part of what Jameis is at this point in career. He's 30. Like, we've seen Jameis play football for 12 years now. We know that he's not a consistent player. And if you're talking about you can win a championship with Jameis, no. Like, that's going to be very, 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 very difficult. But you can be a really good team. You could be like the Steelers. You could be like the Seahawks, right? Like, that's definitely doable with Jameis Winston on a bridge deal. Now, the next question that comes up a lot that I really want to give a full answer to is, how much would that cost? Because there's some people are like, oh, yeah, it's cool that Jameis is playing good, but he's playing himself out of the market for Cleveland. I think a lot of people are overestimating what the market's going to be for Jameis Winston. If you look at quarterbacks at this point in their career, they don't get the bag. Jameis is not at an age where he's going to get the bag for 10 games, right? Like, if he was 26, he might get the bag for 10 games. But at 30, he ain't getting the bag for 10 games, especially when Jameis has played as much football as he has. Like, what gets a quarterback the bag after very little games played is the mystery element of that quarterback, right? That quarterback could be a franchise guy. Like Jameis Winston in 2022, he got 2 years, $28 million, 14 guaranteed. So it was really about 7 average per year. So about $7 million a year for Jameis Winston guaranteed. I think that's all they ended up paying for him. So, and he got that after having like a crazy 17 game per number. I think he was like 36 touchdowns, maybe like 10 interceptions per 17 games. If you look at his 2021 stats, and that's what that earned him, right? At the age of 26, 27, that's what that earned him. It's not going to earn him that same amount at 30, right? For 10 games where the split's not going to be as crazy. So what you're looking at with Jameis is like Gardner Minshew, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco kind of deals. Gardner Minshew is the highest of the guys I mentioned. He was 2 years, 25, but 15 guaranteed. And if you look at how the contract is structured, it's really 2 years, 20. So you're talking about 10 million average per year for Gardner Minshew over 2. Andy Dalton, 2 years, 10 million. So you're talking about 5 over 2. Joe Flacco, 1 year, 4.5. Jameis Winston this year signed for 1 year, $4 million with 4 incentives. What I would think, even if Jameis ends the year as strong as possible and the Browns are going to have to sign him, I don't think that number even approaches $10 million a year if you want to sign him on a 2-year deal. If we're looking at what the market is too, Sam Darnold, if you're a quarterback thirsty team in the offseason, Sam Darnold's going to be much more appealing to you. He's 27 years old, and you can project all that hope onto him that you can't project onto a 30-year-old. So I think that Sam Darnold is probably going to be closer to getting the bag than Jameis Winston, regardless of if Jameis finishes the season stronger, just because how age affects how contracts go out. And Jameis is much older. than Sam Darnold is. The next option for a team probably going to be Kirk Cousins at like $26 million to trade for, and then you have the draft, and then you have guys like Jameis. So you see what I mean there by like there's not going to be a ton of bidders for Jameis to drive up that price. I think the most you end up having to offer him is 2 years, 20 with 8 million guaranteed, or 8 million, maybe like 10 million guaranteed. Um, Realistically, my gut tells me you probably could get him with 2 years, 16-7 guaranteed, and that's if he plays well enough to warrant an extension. Right now, we're only 4 games in. You're not going to extend him at this point. You got plenty of time to do it, and you would most certainly want to wait till the end of the year to do anything close to an extension. But I think 2 years, 16 would make a ton of sense. You'd be able to afford that while being able to pay off the whole Watson contract. And then you could even bring in like a Jacoby Brissett on a cheap deal to back him up. If you really wanted to, you could probably bring in Daniel Jones on a minimum deal to replace DTR. Like if that's something that you wanted to throw a flyer on during the season. Hell, you could just keep him in to compete with DTR until the season starts, because Deshaun gonna be on PUP all year, so you don't have to worry about his roster spot, at least for the off season. Now, when it comes to regular season, he might take a roster spot, he might not. Depends on how fast he recovers. But Jameis is not going to be expensive if this works out. Like I think the most we're talking about $10 million a year, and I don't really think we're gonna get to $10 million a year. I think we get to like 8, but it's really 4, maybe 6 with the incentive. Well, it's like 6, but you can get it up to 8 with the incentives, or get it up to 10 with the incentives, something like that. Incentives are going to be a huge part of the deal when it comes to Jameis, and guarantees are going to be very, very minimal when it comes to Jameis. You're not going to go more than a double-digit guaranteed for a player who's been as inconsistent as Jameis has throughout his career, and no team's going to offer that. So it's not going to be a robust market for Jameis Winston. So if you're the Browns, you could look at him and say, hey, you could bring him back for a couple of years, and it would be a cheap bridge option that can get you above water when it comes to quarterback play. And I think that would be worthwhile, especially if you've made the determination internally that Deshaun Watson is not the future anymore. Now, I've talked enough about how I feel about that. I honestly think they should be at that point. Now, what would be the plan, though, if they sign Jameis to like a little bridge contract, right? 2 more years, something like that. What would the plan be as far as winning? And what would the plan be as far as developing a quarterback, right? Because if you sign Jameis to a 2-year deal, that's not an end-all, be-all. We're not thinking about quarterback for the next couple of years kind of situation. So as far as winning goes, I kind of talked about it. You could be a fun potential playoff team, maybe something like Pittsburgh, maybe something like Seattle. If you draft really well, you could be a team like Detroit or like Pittsburgh this year. But you'll probably be hovering around that wild card picture. Maybe you can win a division. But playoffs would be the goal here. You wouldn't be expecting this team to win a Super Bowl under Jameis Winston. What would the goal be as far as a quarterback? It would be a Jordan Love transition, because if you're doing this and you're thinking, hey, Jameis is going to keep us above water at quarterback play, you're committing to not being terrible, which means you're going to win more games than it requires to have one of the 2027 guys fall into your lap in the top 2-3 picks. So that means you got to draft and develop somebody who isn't a perfect prospect. And I know people immediately shit on this idea anytime somebody brings it up, because like the internet has just become a cynical place, and people love hating on stuff more than they like genuinely enjoying something or genuinely believing in something at times. But most of the quarterbacks in the NFL, if you look at them, weren't perfect prospects coming out of college. Hell, you look at this year's draft. The draft math from the draft analysis this year, and look, I agree with them at the time. Told you Bo Nix was going to be bad. told you Jaden Daniels was somebody to stay away from. He's too old. He had success too late in his career. Same thing with Bo Nix. Don't draft those two guys. It's really a 2-quarterback draft with Caleb Williams and Drake May. Everybody else, right, shot in the dark was what the takes were coming into this year. So much so people laughed at the Falcons. I laughed at the Falcons for drafting Michael Penix. Same thing with Bo Nix. But look at what happened. Bo Nix looked like it's working out. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. You know, the conventional wisdom with the draft last year told you there were two prospects worthwhile, Caleb Williams and Drake May. Turned out there were more than that, because the flaw with conventional draft wisdom is placing too much importance on a prospect being perfect. Because at the end of the day, you draft somebody to develop them. And developing a player itself means that you could take somebody who's not perfect but make them work for you. So that's what the Browns need to do, right? Jordan Love, people laughed at that draft pick when it was made. He wasn't seen as a perfect prospect coming out, but it seems to have worked out. They developed him. That's what we need to do, right? If people want to keep Kevin around because they believe, since he has had success with Jameis Winston and Baker Mayfield and Jacoby Brissett and Joe Flacco, that he can develop a quarterback if he gets the guy that he wants. So he's got to find one of these imperfect prospects over the next couple of years and decide, I want to develop that guy and have it work out. That's how you're going to get your quarterback, right? And honestly, that's how it's going to happen. Even if the Browns don't sign Jameis and they try to bottom out and stink, we've played that game before. It rarely goes the Cleveland Browns way. You either end up like with the 4th pick and all the quarterbacks are in the top 3. It just rarely goes the Browns way. And it's a miserable thing to do to your fan base. So this is how you do it. This is how most teams do it. Look at the best quarterbacks in the world right now. Again, look at the best quarterbacks in the world right now. Not all of them went number 1 overall or number 2 overall. A lot of them were given up on, like Jared Goff, that even went number 1 overall, right? A lot of them were outside the top 2, like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen was outside the top 2. Pat Mahomes was outside the top 2. Like, a lot of these guys were not seen as great prospects or amazing prospects coming out of college, or at the very least, prospects with flaws that people had polarizing opinions on. That should not scare the Browns away from drafting a quarterback. If your whole thesis on drafting a quarterback is, I don't want to do it if it's not going to be a layup, you're never going to get a quarterback. That was the Browns' philosophy since 99. We don't want to draft a quarterback early if it's not going to be a layup. And it didn't work out for us for like 20 plus years, because drafting a quarterback's never going to be a layup. It's never going to be obvious when you have to take a quarterback, unless like you get once in a generation type lucky. And even then, there are ways you can mess that up. So they got to do it the hard way. They got to develop a quarterback, and that's what it's going to take. But those are my expectations for Jameis Winston. If this thing is to work out, what should it look like, and what should we expect if it does work out? This does not guarantee that it does work out with Jameis. We don't know how the rest of the season is going to end. He could throw 4 interceptions on Monday Night Football, and we're going to be back here furious at everybody again, right? He could throw for 4 touchdowns, and this might get crazy. The nature of Jameis Winston is the result is not going to be that predictable, or at least it's going to be a measure of wild in there that you just have to kind of make your peace with, or else you'll just be ping-ponging back and forth like crazy. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.